It was one of those quiet afternoons when everything felt slow and peaceful. The streets were almost empty, the air smelled like fresh rain, and the sound of distant traffic hummed softly in the background. A teenage boy was walking home after basketball practice, still wearing his school jersey, his shoes dusty from the court. He had his backpack over one shoulder and was dribbling a basketball with one hand, lost in his own world. It had been a long day, but a good one. Practice had gone well. He had scored several times, and his coach had even nodded in approval, which was rare. That small sign of respect made him proud. He turned onto his street, humming along to the song playing in his earphones. He liked this part of the day. The walk home always gave him time to think. He dreamed about one day playing college basketball, maybe even going pro. His mother always told him that anything was possible if he worked hard and stayed focused. Those words were his fuel. He lived by them. As he walked, a police car slowly drove past in the opposite direction. He didn't pay much attention. Cops drove through the neighborhood often, and most times they didn't bother anyone. But something felt different about this one. A few seconds later, the car made a sudden U-turn and pulled up beside him. The flashing lights came on. The sharp sound of the siren startled him. He stopped and looked up, confused. One of the officers rolled down the window. "Hey, you! Hold up for a second," the officer said in a firm tone. The boy froze. He pulled one earphone out, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Me?" he asked, pointing at himself. "Yeah, you," the officer replied. "Come over here." The boy's heartbeat quickened. He had never been stopped by the police before. He took a few cautious steps toward the car. The second officer got out of the vehicle, watching him closely. There was something about their expressions that made him uneasy. "Where are you coming from?" the first officer asked. "Basketball practice," the boy said, his voice polite and steady. He pointed toward the direction of the school gym. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir. Just a few blocks away." The officer nodded but didn't seem convinced. "You match the description of someone we're looking for." The boy frowned. "Someone you're looking for?" "Yeah," the other officer said, stepping closer. "Teenage male, dark hoodie, backpack, about your height. There was a report of a suspect running near the gas station a few blocks from here." The boy blinked, trying to understand. "I haven't been near any gas station. I came straight from practice. You mind if we take a look in that bag of yours?" the first officer asked. His throat went dry. "It's just school stuff," he said softly. "Then you won't mind showing us," the officer replied. He didn't want trouble. He had heard enough stories to know that arguing wouldn't help. So he slowly slipped off his backpack and handed it over. His hands were shaking, though he tried to hide it. The officer opened the bag and began rummaging through it. There were books, a notebook, a bottle of water, and his basketball shoes. Nothing else. The boy looked around. A couple of people across the street had started watching. One man had stopped mowing his lawn, and a woman pushing a stroller slowed down. The boy's cheeks burned with embarrassment. He had done nothing wrong, yet he felt like he was being treated like a criminal. "You got any ID?" the officer asked. "Just my school card," the boy said, reaching into his pocket carefully. He moved slowly, making sure both officers could see his hands. He had heard his mother say once, "Always keep your hands visible. Always stay calm." He handed them the card. The officer looked it over and frowned. "This doesn't show your address." "It's just for school," the boy said quietly. The officers exchanged glances. One of them muttered something under his breath. The boy could feel the tension thick in the air. It was like being caught in a storm without any shelter. "Where exactly were you 20 minutes ago?" the officer asked again, still at the gym. "You can ask my coach." The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked the boy up and down, studying his every move. The second officer still held his hand close to his belt, and that made the boy's stomach twist with fear. He swallowed hard. "Sir, can I please call my mom?" he asked. The officers looked at each other. One shrugged. "Go ahead," he said, "but keep it quick." The boy reached for his phone with trembling hands and dialed his mother's number. She answered on the second ring. Hearing her voice almost made him tear up. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. "The police stopped me. They said I look like someone they're searching for." There was silence on the line for a second. Then her voice changed. Calm, but with a firmness that made him feel a little safer. "Where are you?" she asked. He told her the intersection. "They're saying I match a description." "Hand the phone to one of the officers," she said. He held out the phone. "My mom wants to talk to you," he said to the first officer. The man glanced at the phone but didn't take it. "Tell her everything's fine," he said. "We're just checking something out." The boy put the phone back to his ear. He said, "They're just checking something." "Stay calm," she said. Her voice didn't waver. "Keep your hands visible." "I'm coming." He nodded even though she couldn't see him. Just hearing her confidence steadied him a little. His mother had always been like that, strong, focused, and unshaken by pressure. He didn't know what she would do, but he trusted that she would make it right. The officers continued to question him. They asked where he went to school, who he was with earlier, what time he left practice. He answered everything as calmly as he could. The longer it went on, the more tired he felt. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the frustration of not being believed. He wanted to yell that he had done nothing wrong, but he knew that staying quiet was safer. The neighborhood around him felt smaller now. More people were watching. A few had their phones out recording. The flashing lights from the police car made the scene even more visible. The boy could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Every second felt heavy. Then, in the distance, the sound of another car came down the street. It was fast but steady. The officers noticed it too. The black SUV pulled up right behind their patrol car. The engine cut off and the door opened. A woman stepped out wearing professional clothes, moving with calm purpose. She didn't look panicked. She looked determined. The boy immediately recognized her. His shoulders relaxed a little. "Mom," he whispered under his breath. The officers turned toward her. One of them straightened up, unsure who she was. "Ma'am, can we help you?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She walked closer, her heels clicking against the pavement. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled something out. A badge. She held it up firmly. The light caught the gold edges of the emblem. The officers froze. Their entire demeanor changed. She spoke clearly, her voice controlled and direct. "That's my son. Step away from him." No one said anything. The street went quiet. Even the people recording stopped whispering. The two officers exchanged uneasy looks. They suddenly seemed smaller, unsure of what to do. The woman kept her eyes on them. "You've searched his things?" she asked. The first officer nodded, his tone different now. "Yes, ma'am. You were just profiling a teenager walking home from practice," she said, her tone still calm but cold enough to cut through the air. The boy stood silent, watching her. He had never seen her like this, not angry, not emotional, just absolutely in control. The officers backed away slightly. The crowd kept recording, sensing the shift in power. The woman turned to her son and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly, unable to speak for a moment. All the fear he had been holding inside finally started to fade. He wasn't alone anymore. The two officers looked down, unsure what to say. The woman didn't shout or threaten them. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. Her badge gleamed in the fading light, a silent reminder that respect goes both ways. As she guided her son toward the SUV, the crowd began to disperse. The tension that had filled the street slowly lifted, replaced by quiet murmurs. The boy glanced back once, still trying to process everything. The flashing lights reflected in his eyes as he stepped into the car beside his mother. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The car was silent except for the hum of the engine. Finally, his mother reached over and squeezed his hand gently. "You did the right thing," she said softly. He nodded, still looking out the window. The world outside felt different now, a little colder, a little sharper. But when he looked at her, sitting there calm and strong, he realized something. He understood why she had always told him to stay calm, to stay respectful, to stay alert. She knew the world could be unfair. But she also knew that courage didn't always mean fighting back. Sometimes it meant staying steady until help arrived. As they drove away, the lights behind them faded. The street returned to its normal quiet. But that moment, that feeling stayed with him. He would never forget it. The boy sat on the curb, his backpack beside him, still trying to calm his racing heart. The sound of the police car engine hummed quietly in the background, and the flashing lights reflected off the pavement, painting everything in blue and red. He kept his hands visible, resting on his knees as he waited for what felt like an eternity. Every nerve in his body was tense, his mind spinning with questions. Why had this happened? What if the officers decided he was the wrong person anyway? A woman walked down the street, moving quickly but deliberately. She was his mother, and when he saw her, a wave of relief washed over him. She had heard his voice on the phone and knew immediately that something was wrong. Her badge was in her hand, and her presence brought an instant shift in the air. The officers who had been questioning him turned to face her. Their tone changed subtly. They weren't as confident as before. She introduced herself calmly and firmly, telling them that the boy was her son and that they needed to step back. She didn't shout or demand. Her voice had authority, the kind that made people listen. The officers hesitated, glancing at each other. They weren't used to being addressed with such certainty, especially in a situation where they thought they were in control. The boy's mother asked for their names and badge numbers, her tone polite but unwavering. She wanted to ensure accountability from the start. The officers complied, their expressions showing that they understood this was not going to be a simple stop and release. The mother then spoke to her son, asking him if he was okay, if they had touched him, or if he had been threatened. He shook his head slowly, still overwhelmed but relieved that she was there. She positioned herself between her son and the officers, ensuring he felt protected. She explained that she worked in law enforcement herself, and that she understood how situations could escalate if handled poorly. Her presence was enough to shift the balance. The officers, who had moments ago seemed in control, now looked hesitant and unsure. A small crowd had gathered, watching quietly. Some were neighbors, some were curious onlookers, and others had phones raised, recording the scene. The boy's mother continued speaking, her voice steady and clear, outlining the mistakes the officers had made and the potential dangers of their actions. She didn't yell. She didn't make threats. She simply stated facts and asked questions that forced the officers to think about what they had done. The boy watched her closely, amazed at how calm she remained. She had always been strong, but seeing her in action like this was different. She commanded respect without raising her voice, and he felt safe for the first time since the stop began. The officers, recognizing the weight of her words and her authority, took a step back and allowed her to guide her son away from the patrol car. Once they were a few steps away, she crouched down to his level. Her eyes were calm and focused. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Did they hurt you?" He shook his head. "No, Mom, I was scared, but I'm okay now." She nodded, running a hand over his shoulder. "I know it was frightening, but you did exactly what you were supposed to do. You stayed calm and kept your hands visible. That's how you stay safe." He felt a mix of relief and embarrassment, relief that she had arrived in time, embarrassment at how exposed he had felt in front of everyone. "I just didn't want to get in trouble," he admitted. She smiled faintly. "You didn't, you followed the right steps. That's what counts." After ensuring he was steady, she asked the officers to explain why they had stopped him. One of them mumbled something about a report of suspicious activity and a description that matched his appearance. She listened carefully, her expression calm but serious. When they finished, she asked them a few pointed questions, highlighting how their assumptions could have led to unnecessary harm. The officers started to realize the gravity of the situation. They nodded, making notes, but their words lacked the confidence they had shown earlier. She asked for a copy of their report and told them she would be following up with the department. The sergeant would also be contacted, she added, to ensure proper review of their actions. The boy stayed close to her, feeling a sense of security he hadn't felt moments before. The crowd slowly began to disperse, some whispering to each other, some nodding in acknowledgement. The flashing lights from the patrol car were still on, but they didn't feel threatening anymore. They had witnessed accountability in action. Back in the SUV, she spoke to him softly, reminding him that being scared was normal and human, but that staying calm and following the correct steps was what kept him safe. He listened, absorbing every word, realizing that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. Once they returned home, the boy's mother sat with him, going over what had happened in detail. She wanted him to understand not only what had occurred, but why it had happened and how to handle similar situations in the future. They discussed the importance of calmness, communication and maintaining visible hands, as well as how to seek help if needed. The boy asked questions about what his mother would do next, and she explained that she would file the necessary reports, speak with supervisors, and ensure the officers' actions were reviewed. She emphasized that accountability was important, not just for him but for the community as a whole. It wasn't about punishment. It was about preventing future incidents. Later that evening, the boy went outside to play basketball for a while. The familiar feel of the ball in his hands, the sound of it bouncing against the pavement, and the rhythm of his dribbles helped ease the tension in his chest. He realized that even after something frightening, life could still feel normal. The world continued moving and he could find his place in it again. His mother watched from the porch, making sure he was safe. She felt a mixture of relief and pride. Her son had handled a difficult and scary situation with courage and composure. She knew that the events of that night would stay with him, shaping how he approached challenges in the future. As the sun set, they went inside, sharing a quiet dinner. The boy's mother encouraged him to talk about his feelings, and he did, hesitantly at first, then more openly. He spoke about fear, embarrassment, and confusion. She listened patiently, validating his emotions and explaining that it was okay to feel all of that. What mattered was how he responded. Later, before bedtime, she sat beside him and reminded him of the lessons he had learned. Fear was natural, but it didn't have to control him. Calmness, awareness, and proper actions could keep him safe. And having someone to support him, someone who would act decisively when needed, could make all the difference. He fell asleep feeling more confident than he had in the last 24 hours. The events of the day had been frightening, but they had also taught him important lessons about courage, composure, and accountability. He realized that life could be unpredictable, but he had the tools to navigate it safely. The next morning, they began their day with a sense of cautious optimism. The boy felt a new awareness of his surroundings and the people he could rely on. His mother continued her work, both professionally and in guiding him through the lessons of the experience. The incident had left its mark, but it had also brought clarity and growth. Together, they talked about the importance of standing up for oneself, speaking truthfully, and remaining composed in stressful situations. They planned how to communicate with the authorities and ensure that the incident was properly documented. The boy understood that being proactive was a way to prevent future mistakes. As the day progressed, he went to school with a new perspective. He felt more confident, more aware, and more capable. He spoke quietly to his friends about staying calm in difficult situations and being observant of their surroundings. He noticed how the smallest actions could create a ripple effect, influencing not just himself but those around him. When he returned home that evening, his mother and he shared a quiet moment on the porch, watching the neighborhood calm as the sun set. He reflected on the events of the past days, realizing that courage and composure were more valuable than he had ever imagined. The experience had been frightening, but it had also taught him to trust his instincts, listen to guidance, and stay calm under pressure. Before bedtime, they reviewed everything again, ensuring the boy felt prepared for future interactions with law enforcement or any other challenging situation. He understood that fear was part of life, but it didn't have to dictate his actions. Calmness, composure, and informed responses were key. His mother reassured him that she would always be there to support and guide him, giving him the confidence to face whatever came next. That night, as he lay in bed, the boy felt a deep sense of understanding. The lessons of courage, safety, and calmness stayed with him. He knew that the world could be unpredictable and sometimes unfair, but he also knew he had the strength and guidance to handle it. The experience, though frightening, had become a powerful learning moment, one that would guide him for years to come. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. The boy sat at the kitchen table, slowly stirring his cereal even though he wasn't really hungry. His mother was sitting across from him, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone. She had barely slept the night before. The events from the previous evening replayed in her mind again and again. The flashing lights, her son's trembling hands, the fear in his eyes. She had seen many things in her career, but nothing compared to seeing her own child in that situation. She looked up at him. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, though he clearly wasn't. "Yeah, I'm fine." She gave him a look that said she didn't believe that for a second. "You don't have to pretend with me," she said gently. "Last night wasn't okay. It's fine to admit that." He sighed and pushed the bowl away. "I just keep thinking. They didn't even ask questions first. They just assumed." His voice cracked slightly as he said it. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." She reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "I know," she said quietly. "You didn't deserve that. Nobody does." He looked at her, searching for something, an explanation maybe, or a reason that made sense, but she didn't have one. Even as an FBI agent, she couldn't explain why some people rushed to judgment so easily. "I did everything right," he said after a moment. "I stayed calm. I didn't argue." "But it still didn't matter," she nodded. "Sometimes doing everything right isn't enough. But staying calm kept you safe. That's what matters most." He looked down. "It's just not fair." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She paused for a moment, then added, "But we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again to you or to anyone else if we can help it." He raised his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not letting this go," she said, her voice firm now. "They need to be held accountable. What happened was wrong." He felt a small spark of hope at her words, though part of him was still scared. "Won't that make things worse?" "Not if we do it the right way," she said calmly. "I know how this works. I've handled tougher cases than this." She stood up, grabbed her jacket, and picked up her car keys. "Finish your breakfast. I'll be back soon." He watched her leave, unsure whether to feel relieved or nervous. When the door closed, the house fell quiet again. The sound of the refrigerator's hum was the only thing that broke the silence. A few hours later, his mother was sitting in a conference room at the local police department. Her badge rested on the table in front of her. Across from her sat the precinct captain, a middle-aged man who looked like he'd been through too many meetings and not enough sleep. He shifted uncomfortably under her steady gaze. "I understand your concern, Agent," he began, his tone careful. "The situation was unfortunate, but—" "Unfortunate?" she interrupted. "Two of your officers stopped an unarmed teenager on his way home from school, searched his belongings without cause, and threatened to detain him. That's not unfortunate, that's misconduct." The captain took a slow breath. "They believed he matched the description of a suspect." "And did he?" she asked sharply. He hesitated. "The suspect was described as wearing a hoodie and carrying a backpack." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "So were half the students walking home yesterday." The captain looked down, realizing there wasn't much he could say. "I'll have Internal Affairs review the body cam footage," he said finally. "If there was an error in judgment, we'll address it." "Do that," she said. Her tone was calm, but her eyes held a quiet fire. "Because if you don't, I will." After the meeting, she stepped outside into the crisp air. The tension that had been sitting heavy in her chest didn't lift, but she felt a little better knowing she had taken a step forward. Still, she knew this wasn't just about her son, it was about something bigger. She had spent years working to uphold justice. But seeing how easily things could go wrong when bias entered the picture made her realize how much work there still was to do. Meanwhile, her son was at school, trying to focus. His friends had already heard about what happened. Some of them had seen the videos online. The story had spread fast and everyone wanted to talk about it. "Man, are you okay?" one of his classmates asked between periods. "Yeah," he said, giving a small nod. "I'm fine," but deep down he wasn't fine. He felt different now, like something had shifted. The walk to school that morning had felt longer than usual. Every time he saw a police car, his chest tightened just a little. He hated that feeling. He didn't want to be scared. He just wanted things to go back to normal. During lunch, he sat quietly, scrolling through his phone. He found a few short clips from last night, videos people in the neighborhood had posted. Seeing himself on the screen, standing there under the flashing lights, brought it all back. The look on his face, the fear in his eyes, it didn't even feel like him anymore. He quickly locked his phone and put it away. When he got home later that day, his mother was waiting for him. She smiled softly when he walked in. "How was school?" He shrugged. "It was okay. People were talking about it," she nodded. "That was expected." "Are you okay with that?" He hesitated. "I don't know. I just don't like that everyone saw it." She walked over and sat beside him. "I understand. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Sometimes people need to see what really happens to believe it." He looked at her. "You think it'll change anything?" She thought for a moment. "Maybe not right away. But change doesn't happen all at once. It starts with conversations like this." He nodded slowly, though he still seemed unsure. His mother reached into her bag and handed him something, a printed copy of an email. "What's this?" he asked. "It's from the precinct captain," she said. "They're reviewing the officer's actions. I also spoke with the local department about setting up training sessions on fair policing. They agreed to discuss it." He raised his eyebrows. "You did all that already?" She smiled faintly. "You don't waste time when it comes to protecting your family." He stared at the paper in his hands. For the first time since it happened, he felt something close to relief. Maybe things could get better. That evening, they sat outside on the porch as the sun began to set. The street was quiet again, just like it had been the night before. The boy leaned back in his chair, letting the breeze brush against his face. His mother looked at him. "Do you remember what I used to tell you when you were little?" He smiled faintly. "That being brave doesn't mean not being scared?" She nodded. "Exactly. It means facing what scares you anyway." He thought about that for a while. "Were you scared last night?" Her eyes softened. "Terrified," she admitted. "But I couldn't show it. You needed me to be calm." He looked at her differently then. He had always known she was strong, but now he understood it in a new way. Her strength wasn't just about her job or her badge. It was about how she handled fear, with calmness, with dignity, with control. As night fell, they went back inside. The TV played softly in the background, showing news stories and weather updates. For a brief moment, their story appeared on the screen. The headline read, "FBI agent confronts police after wrongful stop of teen." The boy watched it silently. He saw the crowd, the flashing lights, the uncertainty in the officers' faces. Then the camera showed his mother arriving, her badge shining under the streetlight. He glanced at her. She looked back at him, her expression calm but thoughtful. "You okay watching that?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I just didn't realize how scared I looked." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "You had every right to be scared. But you handled yourself well. I'm proud of you." He smiled a little, feeling the weight of her words. "Thanks, Mom." They sat there for a while, just listening to the quiet sounds of the house. The world outside felt unpredictable, but in that moment there was peace. The storm that had shaken their world the night before was beginning to settle. Later, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his thoughts drifted. He thought about what his mother had said, about change, about courage, about staying calm in the face of fear. Maybe he couldn't change everything overnight, but he could start by understanding what had happened and learning from it. In another room, his mother sat at her desk, writing a report. It wasn't just about the incident. It was about the bigger picture, how moments like these could shape a better future. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Her son had faced something that could have broken his spirit, but instead, it had awakened a quiet strength in him. And as she looked at the framed photo of them on her desk, a picture from a happier time, taken long before any of this, she smiled softly. Because even though the world could be unfair, she believed something deeply. Courage and love could still make a difference. Outside, the night grew still again. The stars appeared one by one, quiet witnesses to a family finding strength after fear. The air felt thick with tension as the patrol car lights flashed against nearby houses. The boy stood frozen, unsure whether to move or stay still. His hands trembled slightly, though he kept them raised, just like his mother had taught him. He didn't want to do anything that could be misunderstood. One of the officers circled behind him while the other stayed in front, both speaking in short, sharp tones. He tried to answer their questions, but his voice kept cracking. All he wanted was to go home. Minutes felt like hours. A few neighbors had come outside whispering to each other, phones in hand. Their faces showed curiosity, fear, and confusion all mixed together. The boy wanted to explain that this was all a mistake, that he hadn't done anything wrong. But each time he opened his mouth, the officers spoke over him. One of them started to pull out handcuffs. That was the moment when a dark SUV turned the corner and stopped suddenly beside them. A woman stepped out quickly but calmly. She was dressed in work clothes, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The officers turned to look at her, one of them calling out, asking her to stay back. But she didn't. She kept walking toward them, each step firm and measured. Then she spoke. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight. She said she was his mother, and that they needed to step away from her son immediately. The officers looked at each other, clearly unsure of what to do. The boy turned his head slightly, eyes wide with relief and disbelief. His mother reached into her jacket and pulled out her badge. When the officers saw it, their entire demeanor changed. The tension that had filled the air just seconds ago vanished, replaced by an awkward silence. One of them stammered out a quick apology, saying they were only responding to a report. But she wasn't having it. She asked for their badge numbers, her tone sharp now. The officers hesitated, but when she repeated the request, they complied. The crowd that had gathered began murmuring, phones still recording every second. The boy's mother stood between her son and the officers, her eyes locked on theirs. She didn't yell, but every word she spoke carried power. She told them how reckless their actions were, how easily this situation could have gone wrong. The officers nodded nervously, not knowing what else to say. She turned to her son, her expression softening. She asked if he was okay, if they had touched him, if anything had happened. He shook his head, still struggling to find his voice. She nodded slowly, then turned back to the officers and told them she would be filing an official complaint. One of them tried to explain that they had received a call about a possible break-in nearby, and that her son matched the description. She asked if that description was simply a young black teenager in a hoodie. The officer hesitated before answering, which told her everything she needed to know. She took out her phone, started recording, and said she wanted them to repeat exactly what they had just told her. They looked uncomfortable now, one of them avoiding eye contact. The crowd grew larger, people whispering, some shaking their heads. The flashing lights from the patrol car still painted the street in red and blue, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. The control had changed hands and everyone could feel it. The boy's mother spoke calmly but firmly, explaining that she worked with law enforcement too, just not the kind that made assumptions. Her voice carried the authority of someone who knew the system from the inside. She said she had spent her career training agents on how to handle tense situations without bias or fear. The irony of standing in front of two officers who had just profiled her own son wasn't lost on her. She didn't raise her voice, but every word she said left a mark. The officers tried to offer excuses, but she cut them off. She said the department needed to do better, that they needed to understand the damage moments like this caused, not just to individuals but to entire communities. The boy watched his mother speak, amazed at how calm she remained despite everything. Her hands didn't shake, her tone didn't waver. She was composed, controlled, and completely in charge. Eventually, one of the officers suggested ending the conversation. He said they were sorry for the misunderstanding and that they would note her concerns in their report. She told them that wasn't enough. She wanted a written statement, and she wanted their supervisor present. When they hesitated again, she asked if she needed to call someone from her office to make that happen. That got them moving. One officer called for his sergeant while the other awkwardly stepped aside. As they waited, the boy's mother guided him toward the SUV, telling him to sit inside. He followed without saying a word, still processing everything that had just happened. From inside the car, he could see her standing tall under the flashing lights, her face calm but serious. It was a sight he would never forget. The woman he'd always known as his quiet, loving mom was now someone entirely different, someone powerful, commanding, unshakable. When the sergeant arrived, he approached carefully, taking in the scene. The officers quickly explained what had happened, leaving out the part where they had nearly handcuffed a teenager for walking home. The mother handed the sergeant her badge and credentials, then calmly went through the entire story. She spoke clearly, leaving no detail out. The sergeant listened, nodding, occasionally glancing at his subordinates, who now looked deeply uncomfortable. He offered an apology, promising a full review and assuring her that this would be addressed. She didn't smile or thank him. She just nodded and said she would be following up personally. The sergeant seemed to recognize her authority and assured her again that he would handle it. After a few more tense moments, the flashing lights finally turned off. The officers stepped back toward their car, their faces pale under the streetlights. As they drove away, the crowd began to disperse. Some people waved to the woman, others just nodded silently. She turned back to her son, who had stepped out of the SUV by then. He looked shaken but safe. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him close for a long time. Neither of them spoke at first. The noise of the city slowly faded as the night returned to normal. After a while, she said softly that she was proud of how he handled himself. He told her he tried to stay calm, just like she'd always taught him. She smiled faintly and told him he had done exactly the right thing. Then her face grew serious again. She said that what happened wasn't right, and it wasn't his fault. Sometimes, she explained, people let their fear or bias guide their actions instead of their judgment. It wasn't fair, but it was real, and the best they could do was face it with strength and grace. They sat in the car for a long time before driving home. The boy stared out the window, watching the quiet streets go by, thinking about how quickly things could change. One moment he was just walking home, and the next his life could have taken a completely different turn. He didn't know how to feel. Angry, scared, relieved, maybe all of it at once. His mother kept one hand on the wheel and the other gently resting on his shoulder. She told him that no matter what, she would always protect him. Not just because she was his mother, but because she had seen too many situations like this end the wrong way. That was why she did what she did, to make sure fewer families ever had to go through moments like this. When they finally reached home, the boy went straight to his room, still lost in thought. His mother made a call to a colleague, her voice calm but firm, outlining what had happened. She didn't raise her voice once, but there was no mistaking the resolve behind her words. She wanted accountability, not revenge, just the truth and change where it mattered. When she hung up, she stood quietly for a moment, staring out the window. In that stillness, the weight of the night settled over her. She knew how close it had come to being something far worse, but she also knew she had done what needed to be done. Outside, the world carried on as usual. Cars passed, lights flickered, people moved about. But for her and her son, things felt different now. The experience had left a mark, one they would both carry for a long time. Before going to bed, she checked on her son. He was lying awake, staring at the ceiling. She sat beside him, brushing his hair gently and telling him to rest. Tomorrow, she said, would be a new day. He nodded slowly, eyes heavy with exhaustion. She stayed there until he finally drifted off, then whispered softly that she loved him more than anything. That night, as she turned off the lights and stood by the doorway, she promised herself that she would make sure what happened wouldn't be forgotten, not just for her son, but for every family that had ever felt the same fear. She knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but it had to start somewhere, and she was ready to be that start. The next morning felt different from the day before. The boy woke up slowly, the events of the past 2 days heavy on his mind. His mother was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with quiet focus. The smell of toast and coffee filled the air. The boy moved to the table and sat down, still thinking about everything that had happened. It was strange to feel relief and fear at the same time, but that's exactly what he felt. His mother looked at him and smiled softly. "You slept well?" she asked. He shrugged. "Sort of. I keep thinking about last night." She nodded knowingly. "It was a lot. But you were brave. You stayed calm when it mattered most. That's something not everyone can do." He looked down at his hands, thinking about how small they had felt in the presence of the officers, and how much stronger he had felt once his mother arrived. "I didn't know what to do at first," he admitted. "I just froze." "That's normal," she said. "It's human. What matters is that you kept your head and followed what we've always taught you. You listened, stayed calm, and kept yourself safe." He took a bite of toast, chewing slowly. The warmth and the smell made him feel a little better. He had never realized how comfort food could be grounding. It reminded him of ordinary mornings of normal life, which felt important now more than ever. After breakfast, his mother took him aside. "Today we start making sure this story has meaning. Not just for you, but for anyone who might be in the same situation." He looked at her with wide eyes. "What do you mean?" She explained that she would be filing reports, speaking to officials, and following up with the department to ensure accountability. But beyond that, she wanted to find a way to help others understand the importance of fairness, patience, and careful judgment. "Change doesn't come from one incident alone," she said. "It comes from awareness and persistence." He nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "So this isn't just about me?" "No," she said firmly. "It's bigger than any one person. And if we can make a difference, then something positive comes out of this." The day went on with a strange mix of normalcy and reflection. He went to school, walked the hallways, and tried to focus on his classes, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been changed by the experience. Every glance at a police officer, every flash of lights outside the window reminded him of how quickly life could turn. He tried not to let fear control him, but it was there, lingering just beneath the surface. During lunch, he and a friend spoke quietly in the corner of the cafeteria. "I can't believe it happened," his friend said, eyes wide. "I saw the videos online. You looked scared." "I was," he admitted. "But Mom came. She made sure nothing worse happened." His friend nodded. "That's amazing. I don't think I could have handled it that well." "I didn't handle it perfectly," he said, shaking his head. "I froze. I was afraid. But I stayed calm when it mattered. Mom taught me that." The conversation stayed with him as the day went on. He realized that courage didn't mean being fearless. It meant acting despite fear, and that was a lesson he would carry with him from now on. After school, they went to the local precinct together. His mother wanted to ensure that the officers' actions were properly documented. She had meetings with supervisors, internal affairs, and community representatives. The boy watched quietly, learning how to advocate for fairness, how to communicate firmly but calmly, and how to make an impact without letting anger take control. His mother's ability to navigate bureaucracy and authority impressed him deeply. At one point, she took him into a quiet office and explained the importance of keeping calm, even when things seemed unfair. "You can change minds with words and calm determination, not force or shouting," she said. "That's what real strength is." He listened closely, absorbing every word. The idea that he could influence change, even as a teenager, made him feel a sense of purpose. It was empowering. When they returned home in the evening, the neighborhood felt peaceful. He walked slowly beside his mother, watching the sun set over familiar streets. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, and the quiet was comforting. He thought about how different the past few days had been. The fear, the confusion, the uncertainty, they all contrasted so sharply with these calm moments. It made him value normalcy in a way he never had before. Back inside, they sat at the table again, sharing a quiet dinner. His mother talked about her day, the meetings she had, and the steps she was taking to make sure the incident would be taken seriously. He listened, occasionally asking questions. It was a conversation he felt proud to be part of. He realized that being informed and involved was a form of empowerment. Later that night, as he got ready for bed, he reflected on the lessons he had learned. Fear was natural, but it didn't have to control you. Calmness could be a weapon, and understanding could create change. And the presence of someone who cared deeply, who knew how to act, could turn a frightening situation into one of protection and safety. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the past days seemed to play in his mind like a movie. He saw the flashing lights, the officers' faces, the way the crowd had watched silently. And then he saw his mother arriving, calm and firm, her badge gleaming, her eyes steady. He felt a surge of gratitude and pride. He had witnessed courage, and he had been part of it too, even in his small, quiet way. His mother checked in on him before going to her own room. She reminded him that being brave wasn't about never feeling scared. It was about facing that fear, keeping your head and making wise decisions. She told him she loved him, and that she would always be there to protect him. Those words, spoken softly but firmly, brought him comfort. The night passed, and the world outside remained still. The incident had left its mark, but it had also taught invaluable lessons. The boy understood now that one moment of fear could lead to a lifetime of learning and growth. He knew that he could take the lessons from this experience and use them to be stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. The next morning, he woke up feeling different. He was still cautious, but he also felt a sense of empowerment. He went through his morning routine with care, taking time to appreciate simple things: the sunlight through the window, the sound of birds, the smell of breakfast. He understood that life could be unpredictable, but he also knew he had the tools to handle it with courage. His mother sat at the table with him, a quiet smile on her face. She didn't need to say much. Her presence alone reminded him of strength, guidance, and love. As he ate, he realized that the days ahead would bring more challenges, but he felt ready. Not fearless, but prepared. Not without concern, but armed with knowledge and courage. They spent the rest of the morning discussing ways to use the experience constructively. His mother explained the importance of speaking up, documenting events, and supporting those who might be in similar situations. They talked about community awareness and education, about how small actions could lead to meaningful change. The boy listened intently, realizing that he could play a role even at his age in shaping a safer, fairer environment for everyone. As the day went on, he carried himself differently. His steps were steadier, his posture more confident. He noticed the world around him in new ways, more observant and thoughtful. He understood that life was unpredictable, but he also knew that courage, calmness, and the right guidance could make a difference. The experience had been frightening, but it had also been a lesson in resilience and understanding. That evening, they went for a walk around the neighborhood. The sun was setting again, casting long shadows and golden light. The boy held his mother's hand for a moment, feeling safe and grounded. They didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable. Both understood that the world could be unfair, but that love, preparation, and courage could help navigate it. Back at home, the boy prepared for bed, reflecting on all that had happened. The fear had been real, the lessons had been valuable, and the bond with his mother had grown stronger. He realized that life's challenges could be daunting, but they also offered opportunities for growth, understanding, and strength. As he drifted off to sleep, he felt a sense of peace. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he also knew that he had the tools to face them. The world was unpredictable, but he was not powerless. Courage, calmness, and the love of someone who would always protect him would guide his steps. And that was more than enough.